Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we've got a pretty fun video to shoot for you here. I've got pretty much a tech talk style video and showing you a little bit of the research and development that we do behind the scenes. Again, kind of like the last video that I shot. And we're going to talk to you about the launch of a new product that is a result of several years worth of development work. Before I get started though, I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Gavin for the cool t-shirt. I got a new red t-shirt. This is Nissan. It's embroidered on it, which is pretty cool. And then this Datsun t-shirt that's got the old school Datsun on there and the Datsun on the back there, which is really cool. And I was going to wear this one. I really like it. But black just doesn't work well in this room because everything in here is black. So thanks a lot for the t-shirt. Anybody wanting to send me t-shirts, if I like the t-shirt, I may wear it in a video. Now, let's get into a discussion about waveguides. And what a waveguide is kind of a small horn. A horn is like a megaphone. When you put a horn on a speaker, it compresses it, and there's a whole bunch of compression, and then there's usually resonances within the horn and things, and it amplifies that signal, especially in the lower frequency ranges. A waveguide is very similar, but it's more shallow, and it is more about controlled dispersion and controlled directivity, and not so much about amplification or increased output capability that you get when you use a horn. With the waveguides, though, depending on the depth of the waveguide and how big it is, it can lift the lower frequency ranges. As wavelengths get longer, they tend to spread out, and as they spread out and get bigger, they will compress, and it will increase output levels. So a lot of times you can put a waveguide on a tweeter and you can get that lower output, and then you can put an even smaller capacitor on it. So electrically it's not playing down as low, but acoustically it is playing down very low. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. And I know there's companies out there that make plastic formed waveguides that you can just buy for dome tweeters and just stick onto any dome tweeter. Those don't work. Those don't work at all. It's very rare to get any of those to work properly. It's a very tricky situation when you get into waveguides because the waveguide changes the compliance of the driver. In other words, it puts pressure on the diaphragm, even though you think, how is just a waveguide or a horn going to change the pressure on the diaphragm? But it does, and it does quite a bit. As sound leaves that pressure is seen by the diaphragm. So when you design a tweeter for a waveguide, you have to design it specifically for that waveguide, and you have to take into account the airspace on the back side of that tweeter. So if you take a dome tweeter, you put a waveguide on it, suddenly the diaphragm is loaded more than it was, and you've changed the compliance, and it completely changes the response. Also, if it's loading that diaphragm too much at the throat, there's always some throat cancellation that can take place, and it can actually decrease the output by that cancellation. It can cause a big hole in the response. So you have to kind of go back and forth. You have to design the tweeter with the waveguide on it, and then adjust the airspace on the back of the tweeter, sometimes making that airspace bigger to keep the compliance the same in order to kind of juggle the response. And a lot of times it's just trial and error, figuring out exactly what each tweeter wants, because no two tweeters are the same. What works well for one tweeter will not work at all for some other tweeters. And we have spent a ton of time in development with waveguides using our GR NEO3 tweeter, which is a planar magnetic tweeter, which is one of the best sounding tweeters we've ever worked with, ever, including everything, all the ribbons, the domes, everything. These things play down really, really low on their own. They're really robust and rugged. They're very fast. They're very detailed. They're not sharp, harsh, bright. They're very smooth, but the resolution levels are off the chart. And we realized that they work well with waveguides, but the waveguide is very specific. Any little changes to the waveguide completely changes the response of the driver. So in all of our kits that we sell with this tweeter, we also sell either a flat pack or a front baffle that's already cut because it's so sensitive. And I know I have people, especially guys overseas, they want to build in Exoticas or in Extremes or a studio monitor. They say, just send me the plans and I'll cut them myself. No, you can't. While you may be a skilled woodworker, any little change is going to change the response. And I'm going to show you that. You're going to understand after we go through all of this today what little changes and variations can completely change the response of this tweeter. Even changing the surface area around the waveguide. Now, we went through tons of shapes before we got this shape, which we're using in the NX Studio monitor, the NX Extreme, and NX Exotica. And the reason this shape works is it's specific for open baffle. Even in the NX Studio monitor, it's in a situation where the top of the speaker is completely open. In this case, there's grill cloth across the top. The whole top is open, so it's playing without any loading of a cup or anything on the back of it. Because as soon as you add a cup to the back of it, and this is a deep waveguide, a deep back cup for it, it completely changes the response because it's completely changing the way the diaphragm is loaded. And like with this NX Studio front baffle that we tested with, if you make the baffle wider, if you make it taller, it tends to change the response of the output because the surface area here becomes part of the waveguide in the lower frequency ranges. Like this great cabinet that Peter made for us, beautifully done. It's got a GR logo on the side. The way he did this front baffle, I know it's black and you guys can't see it that well in the video, but it's really nice. But there's an added amount of space right above the tweeter there, and that added surface reflections that change the response of the tweeter a little bit. So we would have to go in and change the filter a little bit for this model versus the test baffles that we were doing. Fortunately, he was able to cut the waveguide almost exactly the same, and it worked out pretty well. But any little change, like I said, makes a big difference. And we're going to go through some of the development work that we've done with waveguides for this tweeter. And we're going to look at some of the measured responses with and without a cup on the back. So when you put a cup on the back and we load, sorry about that, I know that made a lot of racket, the microphone's sitting right there. When we load this with insulation and stuff and we glue this to the back of this, it definitely changes the compliance of the diaphragm and it changes the response. BG used to have some with a little shallow cup on it, which keeps the driver's response flat for quite a bit, but then there's a knee at the bottom. Like it drops off more drastically instead of having a nice roll-off. The more you load it, the more it tends to limit how low it'll go, and the more of a knee it tends to have on it. So we wound up testing our tweeter with one of the BG faceplates, which was what this tweeter was modeled after, only we made some changes to it. We used a Kapton film instead of Calidex film, and we used pure copper terminals, and we wound up getting a lot better sound out of it than the original BG tweeter. But it's based on the same exact frame, so it fits the old BG faceplate. And so let's look at the frequency response with the BG faceplate with and without the cup on the back. And let's throw this up. We're going to call this measurement number 1. And there's a red line and a green line there, and the one that extends out much lower, that's with no back cup on it at all. And with the cup on it, you can see it limits how low it'll play. So next, let's look at the same tweeter and everything, but with just a flat, like we replicated that waveguide, our faceplate, and wanted to see what it did with just barely a little bit of a lip around it. And that's clip number 2, or measurement number 2. You can see that, again, there's quite a bit of difference between the output on whether or not it has a cup on the back. So just imagine when you put a dome tweeter into a waveguide, how much the response is really altered versus what it really needs is to remove the cup on the back, or to add airspace on the back side of the diaphragm to compensate for what a waveguide or what a baffle is doing. So this stuff is extremely sensitive. Next one, number 3, we're going to look at what we call the wedgie guide. We did a little model where we call it the wedgie. It was a little bitty narrow speaker. It had 4 3-inchers and one of the Neo tweeters in it, and it was designed to play an open baffle, And this needed to be 3/4 of an inch deep so that the voice coil was aligned with the voice coils of the 3 inchers. And man, did this thing sound good and transparent like crazy. Let's look at the measurements on this. We're going to call this measurement number 3. And as you can see, it has a pretty smooth response, even with and without the back cup. But you can see that when we put the back cup on it, how it causes a dipped area in the response. It's very altered when you put the back cup on. When we used it in a baffle with this type of waveguide, and it had no back on it at all. So much smoother. The next one we're going to look at here, we open this area up a little bit in the middle so that it wasn't right at the very edges of it. So we did away with some of the throat cancellation. This is measurement number 4. And it looked really good with no back cup, but as you can see when we put a back cup on it, again, it did not look that great. It's choppy. It's really choppy. So this style just didn't work as well. It wanted one that started right at the edges of it. So let's look at measurement number 5 now. This one, we call it half waveguide. It's like half wedgy. It's a little more rectangular in the way it's shaped. And it worked very much like the one that we did here, where everything was opened up a little more. This one's a little more of a right angle. So pretty nice response out of this one, especially with it in open baffle. So we're getting somewhere. We're figuring out what the tweeter likes. And then, of course, in order to use it with woofers that are bigger, we needed the offset. We needed it deeper to align to the voice coil. So this one I think is measurement number 6, and it also looks pretty good, but you can definitely see huge differences between with and without the back cup on it. The last one here, measurement number 7, we call this waveguide cup revision 2. It's very similar to that first one, but we're opening up the outside a little more and making it a little more of a radius, a little smoother. And as you can see by the measurements there, we're starting to see really smooth results. And some of these later models here that we tested are variations of that we just made this particular printout thicker, because this one had some holes. You could see it didn't completely fill. So we started working with variations of this typology, which gave us a pretty good response. We also realized, hey, this tweeter really likes, a big waveguide. The bigger it is, the more it picks up that lower end. And I want to show you some big waveguides that we did. We 3D print this stuff, and this one we had to 3D print into 2 pieces. And it's a pretty big waveguide, and it has no surface reflection around it. I mean, as soon as it comes out of it, it radiuses off. So let's look at a photo we took of the measured response on this thing, and as you can see, it's really, really good. But the problems with it is the offset is pretty deep, so it's hard to align it to the voice coil of a woofer. We have to go to a bigger woofer. Bigger woofers get further away acoustically. And then how do you make this work? It's not easy to make that. And we then milled one out of MDF, and I'll show you a picture of what the response looked like on that. Notice not only how smooth and how flat it was, but how low it went in frequency. Oh my goodness. This thing worked great, but again, how do you implement something like this? And obviously the customer can't, and we have to mill this thing out of, oh man, it takes forever for the CNC to cut this thing. So you have to start then weighing what works, what doesn't work. What's the most, beneficial application that we can use this stuff in and get good results. So right back to this type of waveguide, and we start doing more research and development work. And this little model here that you see uses one of those waveguides and an M130 woofer, which is one of our favorite little woofers, because it has such a beautiful sound, beautiful vocals out of this woofer. It's very lightweight, very fast. Not designed to play down super low, but in these boxes it'll 3 dB down 55 hertz real easily. But let's look now at what we're able to do with this thing with the crossover on it. So let's take a look here at the on-axis response. Let's look at, let's look first at the crossover response. The crossover for this thing looks fantastic. Notice the waveguide allowed this thing to play a lot lower, and we're crossing this thing just over 1,000 hertz. Now, let me tell you something. When you got a tweeter that'll play easily down to 1,000 hertz, huge advantage over everything else. Huge advantage over a dome tweeter. Because now that woofer's no longer having to play that whole octave. That tweeter's covered, and that tweeter is much faster, much cleaner, much higher resolution, much better detail. Its off-axis response is going to be great. This has very good control directivity. Also, when the crossover point's really low, as you move up or down, the wavelengths are longer where the crossover point is, so we're not changing the time alignment. As you move up and down, there's only a slight degree of phase rotation versus something that's crossed at 2,500 or 3,000 hertz. Just a little movement causes a huge change in phase rotation, and it can cause the drivers to cancel and suck out. In this case, you're going to see in just a minute that that low crossover point remedies that quite a bit. On-axis response looks fantastic. 10 degrees off-axis. Now, we're looking at 10 degrees off-axis because that's typically how you listen to a speaker. Rarely do you have the speaker aimed right at your head. You'll have it tilted out slightly. So sometimes when we see an on-axis and I see a little bit of a peak at the top, I'm not really worried about that, because when you go off-axis, that's going to drop out of it. So that little bit of a peak is only in one place in the room. That's if you're right in front of it. When you tilt it out a little more, you get what we see here at 10 degrees off-axis. The other thing we did on this, and I'll show you this real quick too, is we shot a frequency response and rescaled it to a 10 dB scale, which is just like everyone else uses. I know every time we shoot something, we look at it on a 5 dB scale because we're really zoomed in on what's happening and trying to make corrections to see, exactly where the output levels are on everything. And you don't have that resolution when you go to a 10 dB scale, but everyone else tends to use a 10 dB scale because it makes everything look smoother. So here you go. Frequency response on a 10 dB scale. And then the other thing we did was we experimented with these little rods, these little plastic pieces here that we could then mount on the front of the tweeter that kind of controlled the response right off of it. It made like a little mini waveguide within it, and we worked with that quite a bit to see what effect we could get. And here's a measurement of it with and without those little rods on the top of it. And then let's look at the vertical off-axis. Remember I said the vertical off-axis was going to be really good because we're not changing the time arrival. And it looks fantastic. This is going up 4 inches per measurement on each one. And then we looked at it again going down. So we're at tweeter axis on the original measurement, and then we're going down 4 inches per measurement again. Looks fantastic. And then the horizontal off-axis also looks fantastic. As you move off-axis, it drops off smoothly. It doesn't have any peaks in the response. The impedance drops to 4.8 ohms on the woofer end, 4.6 ohms on the tweeter end. As you can see, nice balanced impedance response all the way across. The other thing is the spectral decay, and this is where the rubber meets the road. Of all the measurements you can look at that might tell you how a speaker sounds, the spectral decay is one of those that tells you how a speaker is going to sound. Because more than anything, any types of distortions or things like that, amplitude peaks, all of that is overshadowed by any ringing or stored energy. Like how fast does the driver play the signal and then stop and not ring and cause things like that. This is one of the fastest I've ever seen. It plays the signal, it stops immediately. That is the cleanest spectral decay ever. That's the target that we want to go with for every time we do anything. It's very difficult to do, but we have a very lightweight paper cone woofer and a very lightweight planar magnetic tweeter. So this thing has turned out fantastic, and I want to say thanks to Hobbs. Hobbs works for me. He's been working for me for quite a few years, and he's been learning all of this, and this was his project. I let him do all of the design work on these waveguides and all the testing on it. And as you can see by some of the measurements on those that we threw up there, some of those were back in 2022. So this is something that's been ongoing for a while. It takes a while to print this stuff. You look at it, you learn from it, you measure it, and you think, what does it really want and how do I change it now further? And he went through that whole process, even these big waveguides and things like that. I know part of it's a learning process, but it was then applied to this speaker, and I let him do the design work on this speaker as far as the crossover design and everything. I mean, I peeked in on him. I was looking at what he was doing. I gave him some pointers, blah, blah, blah. But this was pretty much his baby. So for all of you out there, I'm not the only one here doing some of the work. Hobbs is doing a little bit of it, and this was kind of his first one to do beginning to end, and I think he's got a home run here. This speaker is going to be phenomenal, and you're going to see it on our site soon. You'll be able to order it with a kit, and it's going to come with the waveguide, and it's going to come with the back cup that we have to print. And we're going to go ahead and print each one for each speaker. And I know when we print these big waveguides, it can take about a day for the printer to knock these things out. And when we originally did this, we looked at, once we got it done, do we then have a bunch of faceplates made? Which there's companies I can go to, and $10,000 or $12,000 later for tooling costs, they can knock these faceplates out just like the ones that were knocked out for BG for 50 cents to $1 a piece. You know, they don't cost much to make after you have the tooling done and you've made the mold for it, but the tooling cost is really high. So we have to figure out how many of these things are we going to sell over how much time. Do we spend that money doing injection molded plastic, or do we do like what we did with the NX series and CNC cut it from the end of the front baffle and include the baffle or include the flat pack with the kit? In this case, we decided we would just simply 3D print. Now that we've got it to where these print out smoothly, we're printing them at a little higher resolution. Print the back cup, print the waveguide, and provide you with all of the parts. And this is going to be a pretty inexpensive kit with some high quality upgrade options for Sonocaps that is going to be a phenomenal little speaker. It should in many ways rival the NX Studio monitor, which has the NQ woofer and the open baffle tweeter. I know this has advantages, but this is a much smaller package, a smaller size. It can definitely be used as rear surrounds and things for people that have NX Exoticas and NX Streams up front. It could be used as a desktop speaker. It could be used as a 2-channel speaker with subs, especially small to medium-sized rooms. Then the performance of this is going to be really hard to touch by any speaker at any price point. The measurements bear out that it's near perfect in its response, extremely accurate, and the quality level of parts they're going to offer with this is going to put the performance way up there as well. So very excited about this new model, the NX Bravo. It's like the X Bravo, which was X series, but with the Neo tweeter. So we're just going to call it the NX Bravo. So a little behind the scenes of all the development work that goes into a new product. So, and sometimes that's what sets us apart from a lot of other companies. It's the amount of time we do in development and listening and comparing capacitors, inductors, and resistors, and wire and connectors, and a lot of things come down to listening. And so we implement that into the design as well as all the research and development that goes into it. So hope you guys enjoyed this little look into our research and development, and we'll see you guys in the next video.